Hi, my name's Janine McNally, and I am honored to present this webinar to you all about Generation Alpha and creativity, their need for creativity. I am the founder and director of Equipping Fireflies, which is a nonprofit dedicated to providing, creating resources that are centered around the gospel, a clear gospel message, and that will reach this generation for Jesus. I'm an adjunct professor of Christian education at the Grace School of Theology in Houston, and that is the same place where I graduated last year with my Doctor of Ministry. I've spent the last few years now studying, researching Generation Alpha. My dissertation was Understanding Generation Alpha and How to Adapt Our Ministries to Meet Their Unique Needs. It was a work of love, as 438 pages long with a ton of footnotes. I was in the middle of my Doctor of Education degree, and I decided I would like to write a book about children's ministry. I had a passion for children's ministry, and I was doing some research for this book, which I ended up not writing. But in my research, I came across a footnote from a professor, an article that a professor had written from the University of India, believe it or not. And in that footnote, it mentioned Generation Alpha. And I thought, who is Generation Alpha? I had not heard of them before. And this was back in probably 2022, which is actually almost at the end of their generation. So I did some Googling and did some research and discovered only one book written about Generation Alpha by a guy named Mark McCrindle. He is an Australian sociologist, and he had done some research about that generation. And from that, I realized that nothing had been written from a Christian perspective and a church ministry perspective about this generation. So I sat down to write my dissertation about that very thing. It was a labor of love, as I said, and it took a year of writing pretty much 7 days a week, 8 to 10 hours every day. And from that, I wrote this When You See Fireflies, which is a book to equip leaders and parents about how to minister effectively to Generation Alpha. The name, When You See Fireflies, my daughter came up with that. You may say, why was it called that? She reminded me when we lived in Pennsylvania, our two youngest would go out to play in the backyard. And we had a big backyard with a marshy area at the back. And every evening, fireflies would light up the backyard. They would show up at dusk, and our daughter would say, when do we need to come inside? And I said, when you see fireflies. Why? Because as they were playing, it was something that would get their attention. You couldn't miss it. And it was indicating that darkness was coming. I always taught the kids nothing good happens at night, and to come inside into the light where it's safe so that they can be protected from the dangers that lurk at nighttime. So that's where the name came from. It's available on Amazon. At this point, it is the only book in the Christian circle of books that have been written on this topic. Some books toy with the idea, mention it in a chapter or two, but this whole book is dedicated to Generation Alpha. And as I said, the parallels between fireflies and Christians, in my mind, there's a lot of them. This was just one of them that I came up with. The purpose of fireflies: they are visible at dusk and they attract attention. And as believers, our job is to draw children from the darkness into the light. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And he said to us, you are the light of the world, and we are to shine brightly to attract children to come in from the darkness that this world is surrounded in right now. So you may say, who are our children? Who is Generation Alpha? When you may have noticed, I'm an Australian. My accent is still here after 30 years. When I came over, it was to study at Dallas Seminary to do my Master of Theology degree. And after about 3 months of being in this country, I realized that I was not an American. I felt completely out of place. I had no idea what was wrong with me. I thought something was desperately wrong, and I was just struggling with communicating with Americans in general. They just were misreading me all the time. Somebody gave me this book. It's A Fair Go for All. It was a very short book on Australian and American interactions that was written for businessmen so that they could understand each other and stop clashing. One thing that the book said right up front was if you were from a country that was Africa, Asia, anything from there where there were physical uh, things about your appearance that were obvious, the differences in communication were seen differently. For example, if you went and met with a Chinese person and they said something that you didn't understand, you'd probably assume, oh, that's cultural. That's why they're saying that. But for Australians, we look pretty much the same as you guys. And so when we say something different, you're like, what the heck was that all about? My boyfriend at the time was trying to understand me. He was like, what the heck did she just say? And from my perspective, I had no idea I had said anything wrong. I didn't get it. He didn't get it. So I read this book through and I was like, oh my goodness, that's me. That book tells exactly why I'm having these troubles. It wasn't anything to do with me, it was all cultural. And I gave that book to him to read in the first couple of months of our marriage, and it really helped to avoid a ton of problems. Anyway, all that to say, here's a quote from Harper Lee. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And Americans weren't doing that for me. They didn't climb into my skin. They didn't really get it. I had to climb into their skin and see things from their point of view. So Mark McCrindle, in his book, Generation Alpha, this is what he says: seek first to understand and then to be understood. And our responsibility in order to understand this generation is to first understand why they're doing what they're doing. We need a guidebook, so to speak, on generational differences and how to understand Generation Alpha. And that's what I wrote about in my dissertation and in my book. So we start with basic generational order. You will probably find yourself listed there in one of those generations. Generations tend to last about 15 years. That it is a very subjective science, so to speak. And so that's why when you Google Generation Alpha, some things will give you slightly different dates. But generally, you'll find it's 2010 to 2024. And of course, now we're in 2025. And as of January 1st, 2025, Generation Beta began. So if we're in children's ministry, we need to hurry up and understand Generation Alpha because the oldest are already into their teens and they're in the youth ministry already. Beta has begun. We don't know a lot about them yet. It is all supposition. A lot of it still is with Alpha too because they're not adults and we can only guess, give educational guesses as what they're going to be like as children. As adults. So they were, as I said, born between 2010 and 2024, and they are now anywhere from 0 to 14 years of age. On the whole, their parents were millennials or are millennials, and so all of the characteristics that come with millennial parents are being passed on to Generation Alpha as they raise their children. Generation Alpha are unique in that they were the very first children to be born in the 21st century. Before that, we were all in the 20th century. So they are new century babies, and they were the first to be born into technology. So when Generation Alpha were born, technology was fully in play. iPads, iPhones, the internet, websites, already in play. My children, my youngest is Generation Z, and when she was born, all that technology was not available fully right at the start of her years. She got an iPad probably when she was 13 to use for school. She got an iPhone at 15. But the children that are born today, from the ages of even 1, we put an iPad into their hands to keep them busy when we're trying to get dinner ready. So they were born completely into technology. Older children, it was primarily for education purposes that they receive their technology, but Generation Alpha, it's right there from the beginning. They are genuine digital natives being born into a generation full of technology. So I remember way back, my first TV looked a lot like this. It was black and white. Not much to say about technology with that. My first laptop looked a lot like this. I got it when I came over to the United States to study on my master's degree. I was so proud of that thing. It weighed probably 20 or 30 pounds, but it was great. But that was what laptops were like. We had Juno when we first got married, my husband and I. And I remember he was studying at Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon. And I remember the very first time we ever sent an email. It was using Juno. I typed out an email and I sent it to my family in Australia. And I will never forget saying, I cannot believe that is already over on the other side of the world. It was brand new technology to us, but we were already adults. Now there is so much that is obsolete. I remember we had 26 volume encyclopedia when we were teaching our children. We had antennas on top of our TVs. We taught them cursive writing. We used a key to get into our hotel room. We had landlines, telephones. We had paper maps. My husband loves maps, and we used to carry around this box of geographical maps that everywhere we went to tell us how we get there. Newspapers. We don't need any of this stuff anymore, all because of technology. The three biggest fears of our past generation, or our generations presently: spiders, snakes, and the fear of heights. This recent generation, Generation Alpha, here are their three biggest fears. That symbol, no signal, sends them into sheer panic. This one, buffering. They're trying to load something and it's not fast enough. And then, of course, the dreaded low battery symbol. They are the biggest fears of this generation that is here now. These are two identical photos of the Sistine Chapel during the inauguration of Pope Benedict and then Francis. First one was in 2005 and then 2013. And you can see very clearly there the biggest difference was technology, phones. The whole concept of sharing has changed. We don't share ice creams anymore. We share everything technology. And then looking back at the Oxford English Dictionary Word of the Year, this is the word that summarizes and depicts what happened in that year. Let's take a look at them. In 2011, the year after Generation Alpha began, the word of the year was apps. In 2012, it was cloud, the iCloud. 2013 was hashtag. That's not even a word. It's a symbol. In 2014, the word of the year was selfies, using the camera on our phones. My daughter, our youngest daughter, used to teach at a preschool, and these are a couple of little girls, and what are they doing? They're taking a selfie. In 2015, the word of the year was an emoji. These are our kids. If you have any ministry to children, you will find them off to the side on their phones at all times. And then oftentimes this is a problem for young moms. You're trying to get dinner on the table. Your littlies are underfoot. You don't know what to do with them. So by default, you'll hand them an iPad to keep them busy. And you know what's really interesting? Those little kids, they seem to know exactly how to use everything without you even telling them. One thing I noticed years ago, we were at a restaurant. It was probably 2 years ago. We were at a restaurant, and I remember when our kids were growing up, what did you get at a table when you had children at a restaurant? They would hand you a children's menu, right? With a piece of paper and crayons. On one side was the menu, on the other side were colorings and puzzles to solve. We were at a restaurant, and to the left was this family with two children. They were girls probably around the ages of 6 and 8, and they had been brought a paper children's menu and crayons, and it had been pushed to the side, and both of those little girls were sitting there on their own iPads, keeping busy while the food was being prepared. It's a completely different world, and it has an effect on our children. So Generation Alpha, who are they? So Generation Z didn't receive their first digital devices until their late primary years, and their devices were most likely used for school. Generation Alpha, however, have typically had access to a device from their youngest years, and their screens are their pacifiers. Now, we saw this especially during the years of COVID. They Kids obviously were locked in their homes. They couldn't visit their grandparents. They couldn't visit their friends, couldn't go outside to play. So what happened? They had online school, and that was facilitated by a laptop or an iPad. And then their parents, especially their mums, they were all working from home remotely. And what do you do when you're working from home and the kids are in the room? You give them something to keep them busy. You gave them an iPad pacifier. Interestingly, as you observe this generation, some will view this new generation as device addicted, overindulged, and unreliable. However, those who are discerning might have a different perspective. Instead of seeing them as resilient, digitally savvy, more creative, and confident. And from my perspective, I think they are a bit of both. So it's clear that technology has advantages, and generation is more connected and technologically supplied than any generation previously. They are creative and they are innovative, and they are going to be the ones who lead us into the future. So how do we encourage creativity in Generation Alpha? How do we draw out the creative side and not focus on the addicted and overindulged side just because of their devices? First of all, we need to encourage the parents. The parents are the key, in my opinion, to the success of Generation Alpha. And the first thing we need to do as parents, we need to take control of our busy schedule. Our parents are increasingly busy. They have jam-packed their children's schedules with all sorts of activities in an attempt to help raise the best, most academically excellent, most experientially expert children that we can. So for my dissertation, I surveyed 100 experienced children's ministry leaders and educators, and this is what I asked them. It says, research tells us that the majority of parents do not invest in the discipleship of their children. Why do you think this is the case? And the highest answer was 41% of survey responders said that families are busy, tired, and overscheduled. And then I asked, why do you think it's difficult to engage parents? And 64% said that parents are too busy and overwhelmed by other pressures. So this is where the problem is with the schedules. We get so busy, so scheduled, so tired that we tend to default to the easiest solution, which of course is devices. We turn on a movie, we give them an iPad, we let them play on our phones, and instantly everything is resolved. They're happy, there's no complaints, we don't have to force them to do it, they want to do it by default. Of course, that's a problem, and in order to combat some of that, we need to allow for more creative play. I've got 3 grandchildren now. I have twin 2-year-old boys and a 6-month-old little girl. And the 2 boys, if you were to let them choose what they wanted to do, they would watch Finding Nemo over and over and over again all day, every day. They are completely addicted to that movie and they watch without any problem. If you were to hand them an iPad or a tablet, they would instantly jump on that and have no trouble. The hardest thing to do is let them into the playroom with things that will enable creativity, development of their imagination. But thankfully, at the age of they've just turned 2, they are still pliable. So we can get them into the habit of doing the creativity. But you know what they want? They want us to sit in the playroom with them. They want relationships. They want us to encourage them, to watch them, to help them as they play in that playroom. So we need to allow for more creative play, and we need to be involved in that creative play as well, which is difficult if you're busy and tired, but that's something we need to do. McCrindle says unstructured play and blank canvas creativity is essential. Children are compelled to create or shape an activity when given an open space or a simple piece of sports or play equipment. When given just the blank page and pencils, the brain is forced to impose meaning on the space and imagination is triggered. Excessive use of technology hinders the opportunity to develop imagination, and the ability to stimulate creativity is lost. So we need to make sure that we take control of our schedules and allow for that creative play. Thirdly, we need to allow for boredom. Boredom. I'm bored. I have nothing to do. Have you not heard those comments repeatedly from your children? I know I did. But it's important, it's essential to increase the opportunity for boredom, because boredom is the space in which creativity and imagination happen. Ruder says continual entertainment can curtail boredom and impede the development of creativity. Technology is robbing them of that space. So take control of your schedule, allow for creative play and get involved with the kids, allow for boredom, and then fourth, enforce boundaries. Oh, this one's a hard one. Boundaries are necessary for behavior and technology. There are challenging issues out there right now, including safety, online cybersecurity and safety concerns, cyberbullying, increased access to sex predators and traffickers, and increased appropriate online content and exposure to pornography. The world is an oyster of horrible things, and we need to create safety boundaries for our children, as well as those time boundaries. We need to make sure they're safe. And the problem is that every single app your child downloads, even if you try to put safety restrictions on that app, there are ways around it. And you know what? Our kids will find the ways to get around it. So we need to be really careful. One way we can try to resolve this is, again, to play with them. Sit down on the floor while they're playing on their apps and on their games and interact with them. That way you can watch exactly what they're doing. The second thing we've already alluded to is addiction and dependence on this technology, on these apps. If we don't put boundaries into place, that can result in poor sleep quantity. And a big one is shorter attention spans, because all they're getting as they swipe the screen is instant gratification. So they are wanting things to pop up and they want information instantly instead of waiting and developing that patience. Fifth, what we can do is to read them stories. So this is something we did a lot as parents. We would read them stories and they would develop favorites, and we would read them over and over again. And Mark McCrindle says this: if a child listens to a story being read to them, they have to take the time to process the storyteller's voice into words and imagine in complete pictures the world or situation that is being described, and use effort to follow that storyline. If our children watch a story on their device, they lose the opportunity to develop their creativity and imagination. They are being entertained, but no mental effort is required, because a device does the thinking for the child, and their cognitive muscles remain understimulated and weak. Number 6, get outside. We want to encourage them to spend more time in nature to help our kids build confidence and promote creativity and imagination. It teaches them responsibility. It provides a different sort of stimulation. It gets our kids moving, helping them to think and reduce the stress that naturally will come on their lives. They're outside, they're enjoying the fresh air, they're climbing trees, they're running around the backyard, they're riding their bikes, anything to get them away from their devices and just be able to expand their horizons, their creativity, their imagination, and their play. Some ways you can get your families outside: plant a garden bed or a pot, visit a park. We did that a ton, and our kids still remember every time we did that. Plan weekend walks in nature. We used to live in Colorado, and the hikes it was unlimited what you could do to get outside and walk. We take family trips and holidays, and we did it to get outside. We would take them to places that did hikes, and if you go to the national parks, they have junior ranger badges that the kids can earn by learning about nature. Our kids loved doing that. We would buy them little patches every time they finished a hike, and we bought them a blanket, and I would sew those patches on their blankets, and they would look at those blankets time and time again and remember the things we did outside. We went camping as much as we could. We visited lookouts. Instead of having lunch at a restaurant, we went for picnics. Our youngest loved going for picnics. We would put things in our picnic basket that she would not normally be allowed to have, special treats, and she loved them. Playing a game or sports outside. Kids are big with sports. Encourage that. Go and watch their games. Encourage that outside exercise and entertainment. And then you could even move your indoor tasks like homework or reading outside to get that outside time. Number 7, self-directed learning. This one's an interesting one because it's happening more in schools. Self-directed and individualized learning enables students to work to their own strengths, exercise creativity, and take greater responsibility over the decision-making process and management of their work. So I remember it being in school growing up, and this is what my classroom looked like very much during university. We would sit in rows, all facing the teacher who was a lecturer. There was very little interaction, and that's how we learned. But today, what's happening is educators are catching on and realizing the need to have learner-centric interactive scenarios in their classrooms, and they're starting to look more like this in round circles. You learn more in circles than in rows, and that's what teaching is becoming like. So they're catching on to that, which is great. A Generation Alpha is being shaped in different times to generations past. They are more digital, global, mobile, social, and visual than any generation before them. There is no doubt that Generation Alpha will come up against their challenges, their own storm clouds and uncertainty. But one thing is certain to us: their future is bright, and like every other generation, they will find the tools they need to thrive. The future for Generation Alpha is exciting, full of creativity, innovation, and opportunity. McCrindle says they are not only following the positive examples set by older generations, but they are also empowered to take action, stand up for what they believe in, and pave a new way forward. And it's here that we want to leave you with the anticipation of a great future for Generation Alpha, with the thrill of the new and the thrill of hope. What's happening is this world of ours is developing opportunities in things we could never have imagined and things we struggle to even understand. There's robotics, automation, computerizing, and creativity is becoming the key attribute that children are going to need. I am just beginning to tap into AI. It's completely above my pay grade, but they will be the ones who develop those scenarios way beyond what we could imagine. And computers are completely ill-equipped to generate ideas and to function creativity and innovate. This is the domain of humans and essential to the future of humanity. We need to allow them to develop the creativity so that they can work with devices and technology to help the world move forward in the way it's going. If you're interested in learning more about Generation Alpha, I have made a series, I think, of 8 different short videos that will take you through the different characteristics of Generation Alpha. We've only touched on one aspect, that's technology, and the need to create boundaries for that in order to allow this generation to become more creative. And if you're interested, you can scan that QR code, and that will take you to the very first video, and you can just listen and learn more about what I learned about during the years of my dissertation and my study as I wrote When You See Fireflies. And if you'd like to follow me on Facebook at Equipping Fireflies or email me at Janine at Equipping Fireflies, I would love to interact with you and talk with you about how we can learn together about Generation Alpha. I remember when Jonathan contacted me about doing this webinar, he said he wanted the topic to be on Generation Alpha and creativity. And I was like, I'm not so sure that Generation is that creative. But what his focus was how we can develop that, for they can become the most creative generation yet. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's been helpful. I am honored that you joined me, and I hope we can connect some way in the future. Thanks so much.